Welcome to another fantastic episode of The Fat Minute. I'm your host, Don John, joined tonight by my co host, the inventor of the window that opens when God closes a door, BVJ.
You got to tell me about these ahead of time because I feel like I could have had a really good comeback to that.
I thought you were about to say I should have told you because you've never heard of that saying before.
No, I've heard of that saying. That saying's very old.
Yeah, it's older than water. So, anyway, tonight's episode, we are going to start something we've been talking about doing for a while. As some people who listen to this show may or may not know, Blake and I, we are huge fans of the TV show Frasier. And why are you laughing?
It's funny. It's just funny
Okay, well,
because we are really white.
so's this fucking show. I mean,
I mean, at least we're actually funny, unlike the Friends people.
right? I mean, it's not like we follow a Frasier shitposting group on Facebook or anything.
Yeah. Mm. From the desk of Maris Crane.
From the desk of Maris Crane. That's a good Facebook page. Like I was saying, we're huge fans of the show Frasier. We've been wanting to kind of talk about the show for a while, and eventually we just decided, you know what? Fuck it. Let's just review every single episode of the show.
Hmm.
Um, this isn't going to become the main focus of this podcast. We're not going to do this every single episode from here on out until we finish out the entire show of Frasier. We'll just throw in a random review here and there when we just feel like watching a random episode.
Hmm.
But yeah, just to kind of start off background story, background info, what we each think of the show currently, and how we came to find the show. I mean, I watched the show for the first time last year. People, previous listeners of this podcast may remember Blake and I. We did an episode where we each picked a random episode from our top five favorite TV shows and assigned them as a list to the other person to watch. Blake, you chose an episode from Frasier. I watched it and I was like, how have I not watched this show before? How have I not stumbled across this show before? So I was like,
Hmm.
all right, I want to see more of this show. So I went back to the beginning, started watching it from the very first episode, and instantly got hooked. Binged watched it over the course of a couple months and just fell in love with it. I mean, it is my second favorite show of all time, second only to The Simpsons. It is easily, in my opinion, one of the top five TV shows of all time, and it is easily the best spin-off of all time. I mean,
Oh
the
yeah.
the highest compliment I can give this show is that you don't even know it's a spin-off.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I've never watched an episode of Cheers, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit more as we get into the review for this episode, but I've never watched an episode of Cheers, but I would say that this show has outshone Cheers like head and shoulders.
It's I mean, at the very least, and this isn't even to say one way or the other, it's just a completely not maybe not completely, but it's just a different vibe.
Yeah,
Like this did not take the skeleton of Cheers or whatever and just, make another body based on that. Like it's just
right,
it's its own vibe. Yeah.
right.
So,
So yeah, I mean, yeah, I love the show. In my opinion, there is not a single bad episode in this entire show. Um,
mhm.
Maybe that opinion will change because I've only seen each episode once. So maybe that opinion will change with a second viewing of the whole show. We'll see.
Mhm. Yeah.
I've certainly seen on that Facebook shitposting group that we follow that there are people who very much disagree with that statement I just made. There are people who do have episodes that they absolutely do not like.
it's it's the consensus among the shit posting group is that every episode with Simon Moon
Oh my God.
is just fucking like a
Yeah.
disease.
Yeah. People fucking hate Simon Moon. And I get why, but also I'm kind of like, that's kind of the point of the character. He's supposed to be fucking hated.
Well, yeah, that was my thing. Everybody kept putting him down, and it's like this is like people complaining about Voldemort being mean. It's like that's
Yeah.
not in the point.
Fucking. Yeah, it's going to be great when we get to those episodes. Simon Moon, the most violently British man ever.
Oh Jesus God!
but
Yeah.
but that was another point I was going to bring out about the show. One reason why I think this show is so great and why it lasted as long as it did and why it's aged so well is this show. Frasier, over the course of its entire run, are you putting shit in the microwave? You fucking are, right in
Yeah,
the middle of the podcast.
I'm sorry that I'm like existing in my fucking house.
Anyway,
You acting like I'm like using the ice dispenser all obnoxious like Ryan Johnson did on a podcast. Ryan Johnson was on this one podcast, and every time he got bored, he just went back to his fridge and did the ice dispenser. And I'm like, this man should have finished off Star Wars.
yes, absolutely.
Okay, but go ahead.
But as I was saying, Frasier, it's very rare to see this in any TV show, that especially when it ran as long as Frasier did. But like this show really maintained a consistent level of quality across its entire run, in my opinion.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
one thing that made it work, and I'll get into it a little bit more as we go into the review, is like they didn't do what a lot of other TV shows do, where they introduce like random plot elements or like, oh, here's a brand new recurring character. Like, yes, there's Simon Moon and then there's Daphne's mom and like a couple other characters here and there who come in for like small story arcs for like a handful of episodes.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, Simon's there for a bit more than a handful, but still, he's there for like a fraction of the entire series run, and then like because the plot necessitates it, or at the very least that character moves the plot along, and then
mm-hmm.
once their story arc is done, those characters are gone. Like they're it's not like, hey, here's like Frasier's long lost cousin from like Texas who's now living in the house with the rest of the family. Like
Yeah,
they didn't do anything like that. They stuck to
right.
the core concept.
There's actually an episode just there's actually an episode of Community that mocks that spoofs that. And I know the episode of Community that I had you watch, like you didn't really love it as much, or I think you thought it was just okay. But yeah, there's an episode where they make fun of the whole introducing a new character thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's Jack Black, and he's only in that episode. And they also do the thing where they refilm certain scenes and like he's in the background, and they try to do the thing where it's like, oh, he was there all along, like he was in the back of the classroom, and the whole joke is that it's like, no, man, we're just not feeling it. Like you're late to the party. Like we all have our like development and arcs
Mm-hmm.
and everything all built up. Like you're not doing it for anybody. And it's trying to be like, yeah, the audience isn't into this either. And so yeah, so Frasier is never guilty of that. Like you said, that's good.
There's also an episode of The Simpsons that makes fun of that, where just a random episode, there's just like this random dude, like college age dude living in the Simpsons house named Roy. And just at the end of the episode, he just moves out. He's like, I'm going to go live in an apartment with two beautiful ladies. And it's like the whole episode, they act like Roy has been there the entire time. Like he comes down for breakfast or whatever, and he's like, hey, Simpsons. And I'm like, hey, Roy, just whatever.
That's great.
All right, but back, we'll go ahead and get into the review here. Of course, we are starting with the very first episode of Frasier, The Good Son, which that also reminds me, I felt like this was a good time for us to start our Frasier reviews because, one, it's our 50th episode, so happy 50th episode, Blake.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I mean, two, we recently got confirmation that the Frasier reboot is officially in production. We saw the picture of the script for the first episode, which is going to be called The Good Father. So I felt like this was a great time to finally start this review we've been talking about. So yeah, episode 1 of Frasier, The Good Son, originally aired September 16th, 1993, 2 days before my second birthday. And a little fun piece of trivia here, because I didn't notice this until I was like maybe a couple seasons in, but like the people who call into Frasier's show for advice are usually like celebrity guest stars.
Mm-hmm.
And for this episode, we have Linda Hamilton and Griffin Dunne from American Werewolf in London. And I think it's funny that they're the guest callers because they both have guest roles in later episodes of the show.
Linda Hamilton does.
Yep, and so does Griffin Dunne. The episode with Griffin Dunne is pretty funny too. I can't wait to review that episode. That's a good one.
I mean, just for context for everyone listening right now, like I introduced Donnie to Frasier, but at this point, Donnie's probably surpassed me because I have not seen every single episode. Like, I have never seen the pilot before. Like, I'm
You've
revealing that
never
right now.
seen
Like,
the pilot before?
no, I had never seen the pilot before
Dude.
because my connection to Frasier was that Pop would watch it, and I would watch it with Pop, and we would watch it all the time. But we would watch it on TV,
Hmm.
and this should just be like the standard format of all reruns of all syndications that just show the whole show in order from start to finish, and then when
Yeah.
you've shown all the episodes again, just restart it. But
Which,
like
which
with
to give credit where credit is due, Comedy Central did do that with Scrubs, which was awesome.
Yeah, and I think they do that with The Office reruns now, which is smart. But like back in the day, they would just like basically like throw all the episodes in a jar, shake it up, and then splash it out. And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and and especially like I would notice this with cartoons like Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon back in the day. There would always be two different episodes. There would always be that one episode that you really loved when you
Hmm.
saw it, but they never replayed it again.
Right.
And then there was always that one episode that they replayed way too much.
Yeah.
Like every episode, every cartoon especially has that one episode that they rerun way too many times. And
Yeah.
it's like maybe it lessened over time, but a part of you is also like, I feel like this episode wasn't even that good to begin with. So so that was my connection with Frasier, is that Pop and I would watch it, but that was just like on TV. So like, and he didn't have all the seasons on DVD or whatever. So
Right.
yeah, I had never seen the pilot before. So really, like, Donnie's probably more so like the golden fan than I am now.
Dude,
So
I gotta say, this is kind of awesome knowing that this is your first time watching the pilot episode.
yeah.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get into this review then.
Mm-hmm.
So the episode starts off with main title character Frasier. He is in his little booth at the radio station he works at doing his show where he is a talk radio psychiatrist. He's got people calling in asking for advice. And like one thing about this scene that I love is within the first 90 seconds of this episode, it tells you everything you need to know about this show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
with just because within the first 90 seconds, Frasier he gets a call from somebody saying like, I'm just kind of sick of my life. Like my life isn't bad, but it's just the same old apartment, it's the same old job, it's the same old routine. And Frasier's relating with them by saying, hey, sometimes you just have to make a change in your life, like I did. And
Mm-hmm.
as Frasier puts it, I love this line. I was living in Boston. My wife left me, which was painful, and then she came back, which was excruciating.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I ended the marriage once and for all. I moved back to my hometown in Seattle, and here I am trying to make a fresh start. And that right
Mm-hmm.
there, that is all you need to know about this show in one line, first 90 seconds of the episode. And not only that, it also kind of gives you an idea of what kind of humor we're going to be looking at with this show with, wife left me, which was painful, but then she came back, which was excruciating.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, Frasier gets into like, well, I wouldn't say he gets into an argument, but he's there with his producer Roz, who helps him run the show. And I love the kind of like interaction between Frasier and Roz at the end of this scene, where he's
Mm-hmm.
asking her like, "Oh, it was a good show, wasn't it?" And she's just like dodging the question. He's like, "Roz, it was a good show, wasn't it?"
Yeah.
And I love like because the banter between Roz and Frasier, it really makes you seem like Roz is the boss here.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
makes it seem like she's the one in charge, and Frasier's just like there because she allows it.
Yeah.
um, and like I just love where she just gives him the brutal truth honesty about the show, where she's just like, you had 28 seconds of dead air, you scrambled the station's call letters, and Jerry, the guy with the identity crisis, you kept calling him Jeff. So,
Oh.
I just love that there's that brutal honesty between two people of the opposite sex who are working together in a small enclosure, but like they don't play it up for like any sort of like romantic tension or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Ross is just there to like kind of bust his balls a little bit and keep him in line, and it's great.
Yeah. I would say it was also a display and matchup of book smart versus street smart.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
like, yes, like Frasier is probably technically more educated than Roz
yeah,
was, but it also just didn't matter. Like
Yeah,
Roz was did a better job at being able to read the room
yeah.
and what have you. So yeah,
So then we move into the next scene. Takes place in the cafe. Frasier meets his brother Niles, and this scene here is where I came up with my description for the tone of the humor of the show, which is this show could be described as high class petty.
yeah,
Everybody in the show is intelligent in their own way. Everybody's intelligent, educated, and cultured in their own way, but they still want theirs, and they're going to do anything to get it.
yes,
And it's such a great contrast. Um, but yeah, this is where we get introduced to Niles, and this is another thing. Like a point I was going to make about this entire episode is not a single second is wasted in this entire episode. Like if you have to do a TV pilot, like write it, direct it, or just work on a TV pilot in general, watch this episode and take notes because this is how a TV pilot needs to be done.
yeah.
Um, because
Especially one that isn't like because it. I don't. It doesn't happen as much with like comedies and whatnot, and I don't think they really did it back in the day as much. But like now, a lot of pilots are longer. Like they'll be like the two, like it'll be a double episode or it'll
right,
be like a 2 hour series premiere or whatever. Like
right,
this was like no, the pilot is still 30 minutes, well less than 30 minutes, just
22
like
minutes
what
with
the rest.
commercials.
Yeah, just like what the rest of the show is going to be. You don't get extra time to set up or introduce. Like
Right,
you're still stuck in that same box. So
and you
do with it
have
what you can.
yeah, and you have all this stuff that you have to introduce in this first episode. I mean, when it comes to TV, your first episode and your last episode are your most important ones. And with the
Yeah,
first episode, you have to like build this entire world and hook people into it. And with
yeah,
this pilot episode, not a single second is wasted. Every scene introduces a character and a quirk about them, and it introduces how that affects Frasier. Because with this show, the Frasier isn't just the title character; Frasier is the plot,
yeah.
and how everybody interacts and reacts to him is what moves the plot along.
Hmm.
So, with the last scene, we see that Roz kind of keeps him humble, keeps him grounded at work. Well, here we meet his brother Niles, and I fucking like Niles is my spirit animal. I am Niles, and David Hyde Pierce as Niles is like is like a perfect casting choice.
Yeah,
So yeah, Frasier meets Niles, and I love the fucking banter between these two during this whole scene. Like Niles going on and on about some tiff he's having with his gardener, and Frasier's obviously not listening, and Niles just like, "You didn't hear a word I said, did you?" And Frasier says, "Well, you know what? You're a psychiatrist too. You know what it's like hearing the useless patter of other people." And Niles just goes, "Oh, by the way, I heard your show today."
yeah. They almost play tennis with each other. Like
Yeah,
it's like a tennis match.
it's
Yeah,
it's very rapid fire. It's very witty. It's very subtle too, and it's great to see how like Niles is Frasier's like in this scene you see he's Frasier's best friend, but also like his worst enemy because as you put it
yeah,
in a previous episode, there are plenty of moments throughout this entire show where Niles out Frasier's Frasier,
yeah,
and you could see it just irritates Frasier to the ends of the earth when it happens.
yeah, yeah. I've Yeah, he is both Robin and Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
Like his sidekick but arch nemesis.
Yeah. And I love when they're sitting there and they bring up their dad Martin and how he a buddy of his went to the house to check on him because recently he got injured on the job. Police officer got shot in the hip and had to retire early. And friend came to visit him. Friend found him laying on the bathroom floor. Niles says, "I don't think Dad can live by himself anymore." And they're talking back and forth like, well, there's homes we can send them to, but we don't really want to do that if we don't have to.
We we care so you don't have to.
Yeah.
It
That's
says that.
that
Well,
is,
it may as well.
and I love the line when they talk when Frasier's like, why can't he live with you? Oh, please, he doesn't get along with Maris. Well, who does?
Yeah,
I thought you loved my Maris. I appreciate Maris from a distance, like the sun. Maris is like the sun without the warmth. And eventually they come to agreement that, despite the fact that Frasier and dad haven't necessarily had the greatest relationship. Frasier decides to let their dad, Martin, move in with him in hopes of kind of, renewing their relationship and also
Yeah,
to
yeah,
take care of him. And to kind of also continue on with how this scene is perfect for introducing Niles, I love that Niles kind of has the last, I guess, laugh at the end of the episode, at the end of the scene when the waitress comes up and Frasier's obviously just like, oh man, I'm trying to set up this new life and now I got to adjust for my dad living with me. He's like, I've lost my appetite, and Niles is like, I'll just have a really big piece of cheesecake.
yeah, yeah. I was gonna bring that up. Yeah, just so petty.
Yeah, it's so petty,
I
but
love it.
it's so perfect, and yeah, it's and I think it's great that Niles gets the last laugh in that scene just because again, it because if Frasier had the last laugh, it just would have made him harder to, I guess, relate to, in my opinion.
Right. You need to be able to root for him, or at
Right,
least kind of be like, well, I hope it works out for him for what it's worth.
right.
Yeah.
So that scene ends. Why don't you go ahead and take us into the next scene, Blake?
So the next scene is so as you just described the brother. So we then move into the next scene, which would be the
The father.
father.
Which I love that they do that in every episode. The title cards in between scenes.
Yeah, I like the title cards. It's kind of helpful. So and then followed by this, we'll have the Son and the Holy Spirit. But um, so we have the Father, and I feel like a lot of these decisions could have gone either way. Like, it's like, okay, we need to build a world around Frasier. We need to give him, a family and a brother and a father. And so they make his brother more or less in the same genre of a person as he is.
Yeah,
And that could have gone either way. Like, well, that could have really ended up as a, well, why do we need a carbon copy of Frasier? But
yeah,
like it works so well because like again they do their tennis match of words and just their attitude towards each other. So then with their father they go in the completely opposite
yeah,
direction, literally, where
yeah,
their father is nothing like them.
yeah,
And that could have been a way where it's like, well, how does that make any sense? But it's like you kind of see how that would have happened the way it did.
yeah.
Um, so their father comes in, he's moving in, and he's a retired cop. Um, yeah, I'm not gonna fucking say it, but
Say
anyway,
it, say it, say it.
as my one. Oh god, I don't know. I'm not saying it. I'm
If
gonna save that for
it's
another time.
say it. If it's bad enough, I can always edit it out.
as as my one other buddy who also likes Frasier would say, Martin Crane, he's the only blue life that matters.
Yeah, I'm keeping that.
Um,
That's really good.
but anyway, so his dad moves in, and he is very like. It's funny because for as much as my pop loved the entire world of Frasier and Niles themselves, like I very much see a lot of my pop in Martin Crane.
Hmm.
So he moves in, and he's obviously not happy about the situation himself, um, and you can tell he's tough, but he's not toxic, and that was something that you and I were talking about. You're like he managed to be masculine without having toxic masculinity,
Yeah, he
because
he is he is he is the best TV dad.
yeah, he's the best live action TV dad. Um, but and obviously there's so many moments where he has trouble relating to Frasier, and he kind of he can't help but roll his eyes at some of the stuff that Frasier does that is at the expense of the comfort of those around him. But he never he never just flat out calls Frasier a pussy or anything like that. He never like insults him. He never like
Right.
really like is mean or hateful towards him. He just is kind of like, oh man, I really wish my son knew how to chill out for a moment.
Yeah.
But so he moves in, and Niles is there, and you can tell Niles is almost too happy that the deal is being sealed.
Yeah.
Uh, and I loved. You got to help me with the word here. What was the word that Frasier used to describe the furniture in his home.
I wrote this note down because I think I know where you're going. Eclectic.
Eclectic. So and it was the first. You can tell how iconic the main set of a sitcom becomes to you when you're able to pinpoint something that's missing. As soon as this scene started, I noticed right away. Oh, the chair's not there yet. Like his ugly ass chair,
Yeah.
with duct tape on it and everything.
Yeah.
And it was such an eyesore, because and it's so ironic because the chair itself is supposed to be an eyesore, but seeing this set without that chair
Yeah.
became an even greater eyesore. So I'm waiting for it, I'm waiting for it, and then the doorbell or whatever rings again, and it's the chair, and he's like, no, no, but he's trying to explain, like, you know what he was saying about all of his furniture is that none of it goes together. So therefore, it all goes together because it's eclectic. And he's just like, no, Dad, this chair doesn't go with anything in here. Okay, it's eclectic.
Fucking threw his shit right back at him.
Threw his shit right back at him. And then don't forget, Niles was a little too quick to volunteer to move whatever the other chair was out of the way, so Martin's chair could be moved into space. And then we get, and oh God, I really just wish I could have seen this show from start to finish without knowing anything later on, because they start talking about how Eddie's on his way.
Yeah.
And
Have you told Frasier about Eddie yet?
have you told Frasier about Eddie yet? And then
Eddie,
Niles
goodbye.
loses out. But he's just like, no, Dad, I have to put my foot down. I'm not allowing Eddie to move in here. Eddie can't live with us. And I'm like, I just imagine like people watching this for the first time when it premiered, like
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
night, being like, well, who's Eddie? Is Eddie like his partner? Is Eddie like his buddy, that his roommate or whatever?
Yeah.
Was that who found him? And then the next scene, Eddie's just the dog.
That just for some reason stares at Frasier endlessly.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
fact that it's a dog is like 1,000 times funnier than if it was like some sort of hetero life partner or whatever. I don't know why, but the fact that it's a dog just makes it infinitely funnier.
yeah, yeah. So, so that sums up, I would say the introduction of Marty, and it's
Which,
it's like what you said, like no, there isn't a wasted minute here.
yeah,
Um,
I wouldn't
see,
change a single frame in this episode, let alone a single line of dialogue.
yeah,
And like the end of this scene also like has one of my favorite running jokes of the series, which is Niles's seminars that he runs. Because as Frasier and Martin are already starting to like get on each other's nerves within the first like 2 minutes, Niles is leaving. Oh, I gotta go. I have a dysfunctional family seminar to attend.
mm-hmm,
There's some
yeah,
really great ones that he does later in the series.
yeah.
But yeah, that
Why
scene.
don't I kick it back to you for the next scene?
And it cuts back to he's back at the cafe with Niles, and Frasier's talking about how it's just been a nightmare with his dad because, in Frasier's words, "Sorry I'm late. Dad decided to make breakfast by the glow of the kitchen fire." um, and as Frasier says, it's like I when I'm there, I have to constantly keep an eye on him, and then when I'm not there, I'm constantly worried about what he's getting into. So that leads Niles to say that he and his wife Maris were talking about, and they've decided to jointly pay for a physical therapist to kind of help their dad out, since he is injured and disabled, because he does walk with a cane, shot in the hip again. So Frasier's like, "Oh, that's a great idea. Give me the contact info for an agency. We'll do some interviews." And then it cuts to next scene. Frasier, he's at the door, saying bye to somebody he just interviewed, and he says, "I haven't seen a more impressive person in my entire life." Closes the door, immediately turns around and yells at Martin, "Now, what the hell was wrong with her?" Which I just love the fact that, like, as soon as he closes the door, he starts yelling so fucking loud that there's no way the woman he just spoke to isn't hearing it.
Yeah,
um, and I just love Marty's like, she was casing the joint. She worked with Mother Teresa. Yeah, well, Mother Teresa should check her jewelry box. Uh, but that cut. This is where we get introduced to Daphne Moon, who, surprise, becomes Martin's physical therapist. And with Daphne, you can't help but fall in love with Daphne like immediately. Like I think it's like the accent combined with like the genuine like nature of her and the very endearing nature of her. She's
We caught her with her hand in the biscuit tin.
as she says, yeah. And like I just love when she just plops on the couch and she's just pulling stuff out of her purse. Like it's like Hagrid pulling like trying to find the key to Harry's Gringotts vault in his fucking coat. She's pulling like a broom and like a bunch of other random shit out of her purse trying to find her resume.
Yeah.
Like there's just something about it that's just like you can't help but love this girl.
Yeah.
And you can see it in Martin too. Like he's like, all right, I like this one. And like there's one line here that had me fucking screaming when she sees Eddie and Martin's just like, I call him Eddie Spaghetti. Oh, he likes pasta? Nah, he's got worms. But you
It's
know
good.
they kind of go back and forth with Daphne, and I just love the scene where like the part where Daphne's in the bathroom and Frasier's just like, we're not hiring her, Dad. She thinks she's psychic and
Well,
she's weird.
and it comes back to what the thing that you just said about the first lady is like she keeps going to the bathroom and then it's like Frasier, there's no way that Daphne can't hear you.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I highly doubt that apartment is soundproof.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's like, Dad, she's weird. She thinks she's psychic. Like, we're not hiring her. And Martin's like, what do you care? She'll only be here when you're not here. And I just love Frasier just that second. He's just, well, then what the hell's my problem? So he tells Daphne she's got the job. But then that's when Daphne reveals that the agency told her that this was a live-in position and she would be moving into the apartment if she got the job. Frasier tells her that's not the case. They send Daphne on the way. Martin and Frasier have a fight about it. And this is, a good scene where you get some of the harsh and heavy reality of caring for an elderly relative. That is lightened with some, bold humor, but it's still empathetic even with the bold humor.
Hmm.
And because I mean, this is, I'm sure so many people can relate to this. You have an elderly relative or just a relative in general you want to care for, and you want to take care of them, you want to help them. But yeah, it is like that's another person in your household taking up space, using up your resources, and interfering with your routine. And it's annoyance conflicted with the guilt of being annoyed, and you definitely see that on full display in the scene. And it Martin just straight up says, you didn't bring me here out of the goodness of your heart. It was guilt. And Frasier just straight up says, of course it was guilt, but I still chose to do it because you're my dad, because I wanted to do it because you're my dad. And Martin's just like, oh, I'm sorry, we're such a burden. And Frasier's just like, I had to move all the way to the other side of the country. I had to leave behind my son, who I miss dearly, start my entire life over after a messy divorce. Like, and now I had this whole life planned out for me, and it's not going anything like that. And it would just be nice if you just said thank you once in a while. And Martin just doesn't say it, just walks away. Frasier leaves the apartment.
Yeah.
And then I'll let you go ahead and take us to the final scene of the episode.
So the final scene is, he's back in the studio. It's like the tail end of an episode, or yeah, it's the tail end of their show, and they get one last caller, and his name's Martin, and he's having some trouble with his son, and I'm surprised, like Frasier, for as smart as he is, like he didn't like connect the dots even
Yeah,
sooner,
yeah.
but he obviously does it once he hears the voice, and it's his dad, and he's basically giving a self-aware summary of what's been going on lately. My son just started his new life. He moved back to the area, and now he has to take care of me. And I feel like I've kind of, he had all these plans. He had all these plans set out, and I feel bad that like it's all, none of it's turning out the way he thought it was going to turn out. And he's taking care of me, and I guess I just haven't gotten to tell him that I really appreciate it. Did you hear that? I said thank you. So, and it's good. And I just they nailed him and his dad,
Hmm.
especially in this first episode, because like I said, like it could have gone either way. Like having his parent his only parent, his only living parent, be
Hmm.
like the polar opposite of what he is and who he is, could have seemed really like over the top and try hard, but like it is done in such a sincere way.
Hmm.
It's done in a very genuine way. And it's really the only way that makes sense. And it's the only way that justifies the existence of this show. Um, and yeah, I mean, I love his dad. Um, I love just them trying to like, if not like tiptoe around each other, just navigate around each other.
Hmm.
And I don't know. It's just it made me want to just watch like the rest of the season in one sitting.
Yeah,
So
and I mean, I think that's just more about how, like I said earlier, if you ever have to do a pilot TV episode, watch this episode and take notes.
yeah,
Because, I mean, one thing that's great about this episode is we get that moment at the end where Frasier and his dad, they reconcile a bit and they're like, I'm sorry too, blah, blah, blah. But nothing's really resolved at the end. Like, we are only getting the tip of the iceberg with all of these characters and nothing's actually resolved. And that's a good thing because while we know everything we need to know to get hooked into the show, we're also teased with like there is so much more that's going to happen here. There's so much more to dig into, and there's just a lot of stuff that's going to unfold as the show progresses. Um, and I mean, like just to kind of play into that, I love how during the end credits you see Frasier sitting on the couch trying to read while Daphne and Martin watch TV. So Daphne's on the couch, it's like, oh, well, he went ahead and hired her. um,
yeah, yeah,
and like Eddie is there, of course, staring at him the entire time, which is funny. Um, but yeah, I also love at the beginning of the scene the story that Roz tells Frasier about how Lupe Velez died. Um,
hmm,
Basically, she tried to commit suicide because if she couldn't be remembered for her acting career, she would be remembered for the way she died. And she got sick, went to go to the toilet, tripped head first into the toilet, drowned in the toilet, and that's how she was found. And I just love like she goes through this whole story, telling the story, and Frasier just, why are you telling me this?
yeah,
And yeah, I just love how Roz just makes it relate to his situation. Just, hey, sometimes things don't work the way you plan, but they still have a way of working out. Well, how did that work out for Lupe Velez? Hey, she wanted to be remembered. She wanted to be remembered. Would you ever forget that story?
yeah,
And I just love how after he speaks with Martin on the air, he gets one more caller who's also like, my life isn't working out the way I thought it would. And Frasier just, have you heard the story of Lupe Velez?
it's so good. It's
And
perfect.
I love the scenes with Frasier giving advice throughout the series because I feel like his advice, one, it keeps the show grounded, and two, it kind of brings everything back full circle
Yeah,
a lot of the
yeah,
time. But
yeah.
yeah, that is the end of this episode. End of the first episode of this show. Um, yeah, that's awesome that this was your first time watching it. So, I mean, overall, what did you think of it?
I mean, I love this show. So I mean, and it's like what you said. Like recall I can't recall an episode that I didn't love or just didn't like.
Right.
Um, Obviously, you're always gonna love some episodes more than others, and in other episodes you're maybe like lukewarm on. But
Hmm.
like, yeah, I mean, like with almost every other series, there's always an episode here or there where I'm like, I would have cut this or this one wasn't good enough. Like,
Yeah.
there's even like as much as I loved Chappelle's Show, there's some skits that I was like, this one's kind of like fucked up and mean spirited for me.
Yeah.
But like the Mad Real World, and but with this, it's like, no, I mean, it's just this has to be the greatest writers' room ever assembled. And I don't know where all these people went, but I kind of feel bad that they all had to scatter, I guess, because it's like, man, for however many writers that you had in that room for as long as you did, like, you really like assembled like the elite team.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I wouldn't change a single thing about this entire episode. Like it you can go into this episode not having watched a single episode of Cheers and not be lost at all. So you're already doing a great job as far as a spin-off goes, because
Yeah.
you can go in completely blind and the show will take care of you. Like, it'll do the rest.
Yeah.
And every character, like the characters that get introduced in this episode, these are the characters we're going to be with for the rest of this show, and they are introduced in perfect ways that tells you who they are, what they are, and how they affect Frasier and his routine. And it's great.
Yeah.
It is a masterful TV episode. It's an A plus all the way for me.
Yeah. I agree.
All right, well, if you got nothing else to add, we can go ahead and close the show out here.
Yeah, I'd say end it on a high note. I got nothing else.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. We will be back with a new episode sooner rather than later. So be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the fun stuff. We also have a subreddit, r/Fat Minute Radio. You can find us on all of our social media at Fat Minute Radio. But on that note, thank you, fuck you, goodbye.